Where are the skeptics? Where are the folks who are saying, hey, you know what? If we build a pipeline from Hardisty, Alberta to Prince Rupert for 1 million barrels of heavy crude oil a day, comes out of Alberta, are there going to be customers in Asia? Can their refineries handle it? Are there competitors there that might, undercut us and we don't get that market and on and on and on? I see a flood, an utter flood of op-eds, videos, social media posts, press releases, on and on, saying what a great, wonderful thing it is that Canada is going to build infrastructure and export more of its natural resources, particularly oil and gas. Now, here's one I read that just a couple of days ago. It's in the Globe and Mail, and it's by Darryl White, the CEO of BMO Financial Group, that's Bank of Montreal. Quote, Canada has a rare chance to become an energy superpower. Let's not squander it. How many times have we heard energy superpower? Okay, so I want to make 3 points about this. The first point is that I asked the energy economist Chris Bataille on, a couple months ago when this first became an issue, when it was raised by Prime Minister Mark Carney, saying that Canada is an emerging energy superpower, should become an energy superpower. I said, what is an energy superpower? And Chris very clearly said an energy superpower is one that can move markets. It can influence prices. It can make prices. So on the oil side, Saudi Arabia and OPEC, they act as a swing producer and the market can go up and down depending on what they do. They're an energy superpower. On the natural gas side, the United States is now the world's largest LNG exporter, and Chris said that makes them an energy superpower because they can influence prices and where the market's going. Canada is a very large both oil and gas producer. We're number 4 on oil, and we're number 5 somewhere around there on gas, something like that. So, but we are not, we are, and you'll hear this because I first heard it 25 years ago in the oil and gas industry. Canada, or Alberta, is a price taker, not a price maker. So Canada is not an energy superpower. And frankly, we couldn't produce enough gas, LNG, or oil to become an energy superpower. That's Chris's argument. And so this is what I'm pushing back on. Like, who's pointing this stuff out? Nobody. We're all, and a reader or a viewer captured it very clearly. He was saying to me, you're making great arguments here, but everybody is headed in the other direction. Why are you insisting on going against the grain? Because the evidence and the data and the expert opinion for the folks I've interviewed argue for going against the grain. That's why. I'm not making this stuff up. I spent time in the data, I spent time reading, I spent time interviewing, and out of all of that, I've come to the conclusion that we need to all just take a breath and think about this before we make decisions that are going to cost tens of billions of dollars for Canadian taxpayers. Here's the thing that this is near the end of this White's op-ed. Here's what he says, quote, our collective challenge is now twofold. One, for political parties aligned with this pro-growth, open for business philosophy to keep their foot on the gas. And 2, for Canadians to keep the faith in its delivery. And I would argue to you that faith is the last thing we should have. And I'm going to illustrate why by an example, a mistake of mine. And I spent 2016, 2017, 2018 interviewing oil sands companies and doing work on carbon pricing. And that was because the Rachel Notley NDP government had included in its climate leadership plan an industrial emitters tax to replace the old ESCR. And so what did the oil companies think about that? They thought it was a great idea. I remember interviewing Harbir China, who was the VP of technology for Cenovus Energy, had a number of interviews with him, and he explained, he said, look, we know that climate policy and concern over emissions is going to be a bigger and bigger thing over time. He said, and we are going to have to be, and this was a common phrase back in the day in the industry, cost and carbon competitive. Okay, so if you have a high emissions intensity, and like Europe, you have a carbon border adjustment mechanism that taxes high emissions intensity, it's going to raise your costs. So if you want to be competitive in this global market, you have to get your costs down and your emissions intensity down. That's the argument he made, and it was accepted by all the oil sands CEOs at the time. So in 2018, I wrote the book, and in 2019, we published it. And it was called The New Alberta Advantage Technology, Policy, and the Future of the Oil Sands. And I took them at their word. After all of these interviews, I took them at their word and I said, look, they have the oil sands is working on technology that will significantly lower the emissions intensity of a barrel of heavy sour crude. And this will give them a significant advantage. They will be both low emissions intensity, and they will, they'll operate under a legislative regime in Alberta, which is, arguably environmentally responsible. Here's a little irony. The current energy minister, Brian Jean, his chief of staff is named Vitor Marciano, and Vitor and I agree on absolutely nothing. But you know what? He read the book, bought the book, read the book, and his comment was, Markham, you've been hoodwinked by the oil companies. He said, credit where credit's due. Vitor got it. He said, you have swallowed their argument wholesale, and you haven't been skeptical enough. And Vitor, God bless him, was absolutely correct. And that was a major, and looking back on that book now, if I had to rewrite it, it would be very different. Because what happened in about the time the book came out, and then the next year, 2020, the oil sands companies fired all of those CEOs, or they retired, or whatever happened, but they all left and they got replaced by a bunch of much more, bottom line oriented CEOs. And now we have, this group of, basically pirates who would now argue that the industrial emitters tax in Alberta should be done away with because it's not internationally competitive. Isn't that funny? So I learned a lesson. And the lesson I learned was do not believe everything the oil and gas industry tells you. Now, since 2019, I've done a lot more work on the oil and gas industry's environmental liabilities because I was testing the hypothesis or their argument that if the Alberta regulatory regime is the best in the world and Alberta oil and gas is the most environmentally friendly in the world, you can test that. What are the regulations like? What are the results out oh, no, 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 no. There are $300 billion of unfunded environmental liabilities in the Alberta oil and gas industry, 80,000 inactive wells. And I mean, it's a mess. This is the thing. Once you dig into what the Alberta oil and gas industry is doing, there's the official story. And then there's the unofficial story that almost nobody will talk about because if you do, you'll get punished. You might lose your job and et cetera, et cetera. So it's almost like a conspiracy is too harsh. But if we called it a conspiracy of silence, that wouldn't be a bad way to describe it and fairly accurate. So I learned a lesson, wasn't skeptical enough. And here we are. Now we've got Donald Trump has mobilized Canada, and we're going to trade east and west, and we're going to build big nation-building projects, and we're going to do it in a hurry. And we brought in this Bill C5, the Build Canadian, the One Canadian Economy Act, and we're going to build them in 2 years. We're going to approve them in 2 years, and then we're going to build them fast, and we're going to attract all the capital we need, and it's going to be an orgy of spending and investing, and life as we know it is going to be so much better. Okay, well, taking the lesson I learned from Vitor Marciano and others, I'm now a lot more skeptical. And I spent time doing things like, okay, you want to put a pipeline to Prince Rupert and you want to go sell in China and India? What's the market? Where are the customers? Who are the competitors? What price do you think what are your transportation costs likely to be? What are they with Trans Mountain expansion? And I came away going, I don't think that's a competitive barrel. I don't think Alberta is going to be competitive. Now, I could be wrong. But by being skeptical, by asking the questions, all the industry has to do is step up and say, no, Markham, It's not like that. It's like this. Here's how we're going to control the costs. Here's how we know that there are going to be customers. Here's how we know that we can compete against, like Saudi Arabia and Iraq, who only have transportation costs to India and China of $2 a barrel, whereas we have 18. But here's how we're going to handle that. They could do all of that. It would be such an easy conversation to have, but they won't. Why would they? So if you're skeptical, you look at their silence and go, "Hmm, that's maybe there's something here that we should dig into just a little bit more." And so my point here is, where are the skeptics? Energy media, we're skeptical. We want them to show us the math. That's another one of our slogans these days. You got a project, but got a claim that something will happen to be, demand in Asia for the show us the math. Just show us the math. They're not showing us the math. Take it on faith. And that's what Darryl White said. And this is why I picked this article. It's for Canadians to keep the faith in its delivery. Don't. Do not do not trust on faith. Trust on math. Trust on data, trust on evidence, trust on the opinion of credible experts, but do not trust in faith. That's what I'm asking, because I'm telling you, I've done enough work here and raised enough questions in my own mind that I have no faith. I'll be honest, until some new data comes up, somebody can address the issues that I've raised, zero faith.